Hello, enjoy your UN.
I've always been the one to stay silent, to keep my thoughts to myself, especially at family gatherings. I was never one to stir up trouble, to create conflict. My heart is soft, and my arms are always open to my daughter, Emma, and her family. But that night, that Sunday dinner changed everything. I knew the moment those words escaped Michael's mouth that things would never be the same. It started like any other family dinner. The smell of roast beef seasoned perfectly filled the air. The wooden table where Emma and I once celebrated her first school awards was set with care, and the candles cast a warm glow over the faces of my loved ones. I felt the same familiar comfort in those moments, sitting at the head of the table, the place I had always claimed when it was just us. But tonight something felt different. The seat next to me, once filled by my late husband, now felt empty, even though Michael, my son-in-law, had claimed it. The evening had started with smiles and polite chatter. The children, so young and innocent, excitedly told their stories about school. Michael, of course, had something to prove. He was in a new job, one he'd bragged about for weeks, as if his new title made him a different person. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive wine, his smug smile on full display. "How does it feel being old and useless?" Michael asked, laughing as though it was the punchline of some joke. I blinked. The whole table erupted in laughter. I sat there, stunned, trying to gather my thoughts. His voice echoed in my mind. "Old and useless," he had said, as if those words meant nothing, as if they were just a casual remark, but they were far from it. I didn't flinch, I didn't get upset, not right away. I just kept my gaze steady, my grip tightening on the fork in my hand. The silence that followed his words felt suffocating. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, the prickle of anger rising within me. But I remained calm. I put my fork down slowly, deliberately, not breaking my gaze from his eyes. "And how does it feel knowing this old lady won't be paying for your fancy life anymore?" I said, my voice quiet but firm, the words cutting through the air like a knife. The table fell silent. It wasn't the playful silence that came after a funny joke. No, this was different. It was tense, thick, and the look on Michael's face as the color drained from it told me everything I needed to know. He didn't understand. He hadn't expected this. His expression shifted from surprise to confusion, to disbelief. The family sat still, not knowing what to do. Emma's face flushed red, but she didn't say a word. The kids, confused, looked back and forth between us. Michael fumbled for words, but I could tell he was trying to figure out if I was joking or serious. "Mom, you're not serious, are you?" he stammered, trying to laugh it off. I didn't reply immediately. I just met his eyes, still calm, still firm. "How long did you think I'd stay silent? How long did you think I'd keep paying for your bills, your cars, your house, without once hearing a thank you?" The words were soft, but each one hit harder than the last. The silence stretched on, heavier than the tension in the room. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, cutting through the stillness. I kissed my grandchildren on the forehead, something I hadn't done in a while, and turned to Emma. "Dinner was lovely, sweetheart." "Thank you." I walked toward the door, grabbing my coat from the closet. Michael didn't move. He stayed frozen, his hands still clenched in his lap, the smug expression long gone. I heard Emma's voice, weak, calling after me, but I didn't look back. Not this time. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The cold breeze hit my face, but I didn't mind. It was peaceful out here, away from all the noise, away from the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. The car ride home was the most peaceful silence I'd known in years. I knew deep down that my words would echo in their minds. They would remember that night, but it was more than that. It wasn't just about money or me. It was about respect, about dignity. I had been silent for so long, quietly supporting them, but I wasn't going to be their ATM any longer. I wasn't going to let them treat me as if my love, my care, was something they could demand without gratitude. And so I began to plan. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about showing them that there were consequences to their actions, to their lack of respect. It would be a slow burn, a methodical, well-thought-out plan. They needed to learn what it truly meant to stand on their own 2 feet. And when that time came, when they finally realized the extent of what I had done for them, they would understand. But not yet. Not now. I knew I would never go back to the dinner table, But I also knew that it was time for them to understand the lesson I was teaching. They might not get it today or tomorrow, but eventually they would. And when they did, they would know what true respect felt like. When I closed the door behind me, leaving Michael and Emma in their stunned silence, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. It had been easy to walk away, to finally acknowledge that I wouldn't be their endless bank any longer. For too long I had kept my mouth shut, silently bearing the weight of their requests, their unspoken expectations. But no more. Not now. I walked into the kitchen, the same room where I had spent countless hours cooking meals for my family, cleaning up after dinners and pretending everything was fine. Today it was different. I reached for my notebook, the one I'd kept since Michael and Emma first started their life together. I remember the first time I offered to help them pay their mortgage. I had promised myself it would only be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But that promise turned into years of never-ending financial support. I sat down at the small kitchen table, feeling strangely calm despite the storm brewing inside me. The papers in front of me were stacked neatly, some older than others, but all telling the same story. Years of giving and nothing in return. The first few amounts had been small, just a couple of thousand to help them stay afloat when things were tight. But as the years went on, the numbers got bigger. 15,000 for car loans, 72,000 for medical bills, thousands for school uniforms, books, and supplies. Every year the amounts grew and my bank account shrank. I had given them almost $1 million. $1 million. I put my head in my hands, staring at the pile of bills, the check stubs, the receipts that had once felt like love and care, but now only represented my quiet desperation to feel needed, to feel loved. But now I was done. I grabbed my calculator. $316,800 for mortgage payments. $72,000 for medical expenses. A few thousand for the kids' school supplies. All of it year after year. They had taken it for granted. It wasn't just money, it was my life, my sacrifice. And I had done it all with a smile, never once asking for anything in return. Enough. Enough of this. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. Good afternoon, the voice on the other end said, polite and businesslike. How can I help you today? I'd like to cancel all automatic payments from my account, I said, my voice steady, even calm. There was a brief pause as they verified my details. No trouble at all. In minutes I was told that all the payments, the ones to cover their house, their cars, their kids' school, had been canceled. I'd done it. I'd followed through with my plan. The money that had once flowed without question would stop tomorrow. And when they called, when they begged, I would be ready. That night I didn't feel the weight I thought I would. Instead I felt lighter. The phone stayed silent, save for the occasional buzzing of notifications that I ignored. I went to bed with no regrets, no second thoughts. I was done enabling them. The next morning Emma called. I could hear the panic in her voice from the moment she spoke. Mom, why didn't the mortgage payment go through? What happened? Her words were rushed, full of concern. I could almost see her pacing, her mind scrambling to understand. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Emma, it's your turn now. My help has ended. Time to start paying your own bills. The silence on the other end was deafening. Her voice trembled as she tried to process what I had just said. You can't just stop helping us like this. We'll lose everything. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. It's time to face the consequences, Emma. Just like I did for years. Now you'll see how it feels. I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality. That was it. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. And they were going to have to figure it out just like everyone else does. The day passed quietly, but I knew things were starting to fall apart for them. Michael called soon after, his voice sharp, his tone full of frustration. He didn't even bother to greet me properly. You can't just cancel all the payments. We can't survive without that money. Can't or don't want to? I replied coolly. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breath, heavy with frustration. You've got to help us. You can't just leave us in the lurch. You wanted to know how it feels to be a failure? I said. Now you get to find out. You'll have to solve this mess on your own. Just like I did for all those years without any help. I hung up the phone. The satisfaction of knowing they were finally facing the reality of their situation settling over me like a warm blanket. By evening I could feel their panic through the phone. Michael had already started calling banks and insurance companies, trying to make sense of the mess I had left them in. But it was too late. Their world was crumbling and they knew it. They called again, pleading, almost begging. But I didn't back down. You've had your chance. Now you deal with it. The next day they called again, sounding desperate. Michael's voice was low, nearly breaking. Please, we can't do this without your help. And I just said, now you understand. Now you see what it feels like to be on your own. It was a harsh lesson, but they had needed to learn it. They had taken my generosity, my care, for granted. And now they were going to face the consequences. They weren't going to get away with it any longer. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I needed to do. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even punishment. It was just the truth, plain and simple. They needed to face it. The morning after everything changed, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and my phone rang nonstop. The calls came in rapid succession. First Emma, then Michael. They were both so tangled up in their panic, it was clear they didn't even know who to turn to anymore. Mom, what did you do? Why didn't the mortgage payment go through? Emma's voice was trembling, each word wrapped in panic. I could almost hear her pacing, her feet tapping nervously against the floor. Emma, are you serious? I replied calmly, my tone unchanged. Soon you won't just be worrying about the mortgage. You've got a whole lot more problems to deal with. There was a long silence on the other end. The kind of silence that's louder than words. Just the sound of her breathing, shallow and quick. It hit me then, they were starting to realize the reality. No more free ride. No more endless support. They were going to have to face the consequences of their actions. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Michael this time. His voice was different. No longer the confident, condescending tone he'd used just days before. Now it was full of uncertainty and fear. Mom, we've messed up. Can't you help us with the mortgage? We don't have any money. We're going to lose the house, he pleaded. I didn't hesitate. And how did you think it was going to work? I responded coldly, not letting him off the hook. For all these years I helped you, but the help ends here. Now you need to figure it out yourself. I could hear him stumbling, trying to find words, but I wasn't interested in listening to his excuses anymore. For too long, they had relied on me without ever truly appreciating it. Now they were going to have to face the reality they had created. The calls kept coming. Their voices became weaker. The desperation in their words growing. Emma started throwing out ideas. Maybe we should take out a loan again? What if I sell some things? But I had heard it all before. Their questions were nothing more than last-ditch efforts to patch up a sinking ship. It was too late for that. They were powerless, and that was the best part of all of this. By the afternoon, they had gone to the bank, trying to salvage what was left of their crumbling world. Michael told me they had no choice but to scramble together what little they could. They started cutting back, putting together whatever savings they had left. But it was clear. Nothing was going to save them now. I could feel it. This was the beginning of their awakening. They had always thought I'd be there, that I'd always provide, that I'd keep them afloat no matter what. But now they knew. I wasn't coming back. Not this time. And deep down I could feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The next day I went to my bank, taking the first steps in securing my own future. I moved some money into my personal accounts, clearing up any mess I had left from all those years of giving. As I dealt with the final remnants of my financial help to them, I couldn't help but reflect on what I was really doing. This wasn't just about cutting them off. This was my chance to test their character, to see if they would truly understand what hard work and responsibility meant. As the hours passed, they continued to struggle. Michael was searching for any way to salvage their situation, but every decision felt like a desperate scramble. He couldn't find a way out, and Emma's attempts to negotiate only seemed to make things worse. But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to fix their mess anymore. This was the point of no return. For them, this was a wake-up call. A lesson in what it really means to rely on themselves. And for me, it was the start of something new. I knew it wouldn't be easy for them, but they needed to learn how to handle their own lives. No more enabling. No more pretending everything would be fine because Grandma was there to pay for it. I had done the right thing no matter how hard it was. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my own dignity, my own life. And while they were just beginning to realize what they had lost, I was already preparing for the next chapter. The next day unfolded exactly as I had expected. Emma called again, but this time her voice was completely different. No longer the calm, reasonable daughter I once knew. Her words came tumbling out in a rush, each sentence more desperate than the last. They had no idea how to hold their lives together anymore. Everything was collapsing piece by piece like a house of cards. Mom, we can't pay for the car, we can't afford the kids' school. They're refusing to give us a loan. I don't know what to do. You promised you'd help. Her voice cracked with helplessness. I listened to her trying to convince me, as she had countless times before, that I should just go back to being the safety net she had always depended on. But there was no pity in me now. For all these years, as I pulled them from financial ruin, they felt invincible. They thought nothing could touch them because I was always there to cover their bills. But now I was done. Emma, I've known for a long time that I can't be your bank anymore, I said, my voice steady. If you don't learn how to live on your own money, nothing will ever change. There will be no more help. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It seemed like she couldn't grasp what I was saying. She wasn't ready to hear it, but I had made my decision. The safety net was gone. But what truly shocked me wasn't the panic in her voice, or the way she scrambled for solutions. No, what shook me to the core was how quickly things began to shift. Michael, in all his arrogance, started to change. He showed up at my house, strutting in with the same cocky confidence that he had always had. But I could feel it. Beneath that exterior, it was clear he was rattled. The man who once thought he could get away with anything was now crumbling in front of me. Sarah, let's talk, he said, his voice now lacking the usual bravado. You can't just take away your support. We can't survive without it. I sat in my chair, not in a rush to respond. I looked at him, and for the first time in all these years, I could see the panic beneath his facade. He was finally facing the consequences of his actions, the consequences I had been shielding them from for so long. I'm not leaving you, Michael, I said calmly, looking him in the eye. I'm just not helping anymore. Now you need to understand what it's like to survive on your own. Michael fell silent. His face froze like someone trying to understand a truth that was just too big to grasp. And in that moment I realized they were beginning to feel the weight of their choices. It was harder than I thought it would be for them, but it was necessary. I stood up from my chair, walked to my office, and began organizing the financial documents. So much of what I had done for them couldn't be undone, but it was time to take control of my own life again. I looked at their faces, their desperation, their disillusionment, and I didn't feel guilty. It had taken me too long to realize it, but now I understood. My kindness could no longer be unlimited. I had to set boundaries. Around midday the phone rang again. It was Emma, her voice shaking as she admitted defeat. She said they had no money left, not even for the kids' school lunches. Mom, we can't keep going like this. The kids are asking why we're not taking them to dance lessons, why their teacher doesn't have funding for materials. We can't live like this anymore, she said, her voice full of frustration. I felt nothing but certainty as I spoke. Now you have to understand what it means to work and live on what you have. There won't be this endless flow of money anymore. I'm not helping you. She tried to argue to convince me that this wasn't the right time, but I didn't listen. My position was clear. There was no going back. Later that evening I sat in my office, reviewing the papers I had organized. As the weight of the situation started to settle, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't going to give in again. I had done the right thing. No more enabling. No more feeling responsible for their every mistake. Their lives were falling apart, but that wasn't my burden anymore. Their pride no longer mattered. They had no choice but to face the consequences. And in that moment I felt the tension inside me release. I had taken the hardest step, but I knew it was the right one. The next few weeks would be hard for them, but it was only by facing these challenges on their own that they would grow. And though it was painful, it was the only way they could understand what real responsibility felt like. A week had passed, but with each day I felt my strength growing. Every call from Emma or Michael no longer stirred any pity within me. They tried, as always, to convince me to return to the old ways, to help them out once more. But the more I heard their voices, the more I felt my patience evaporating. This wasn't just a battle over money. It was a battle for their dignity and respect for me, which they had lost the moment they began to take my help for granted. The next day, as I was heading to the store, I saw Michael standing on the doorstep of my house. His appearance was completely different now. Gone was the confident business persona he had worn only a few weeks ago. Now he seemed like a man who realized that losing everything was far scarier than pretending to be the head of the family. I walked up to the door, quietly opened it, and he immediately pushed his way inside without asking for permission. "Sarah, we need to talk," he began, his voice less certain than before. "Everything's falling apart. We can't find any other way to fix this. We need your help. You have to understand, Emma and I are in a hopeless situation." "Yes, Michael, I understand," I replied calmly, not even looking at him. I sat down at the table and pulled out the calculator, preparing to tally up what they still owed. "But now, I will only help you on my terms." "No terms, no help." Michael stood in front of me, looking like a child who had just lost his last hope for salvation. His attempts to manipulate me no longer worked. I could see his pride breaking into pieces, and that, for me, was the greatest victory. "What do you want, Sarah? Tell me, we'll do anything to make this end." His voice was filled with desperation, no longer arrogant. "I don't want anything, Michael. I just want you to understand. Money doesn't come out of thin air. You need to live on what you earn and pay for what you consume." Michael didn't respond. Instead, he sat down, lowering his head, and I saw the tears welling in his eyes. That moment, the moment I had been waiting for, had finally arrived. This was what I needed to see. A moment when they finally realized that you can't take and take without giving anything in return. "I'm tired of your apologies," I continued, my voice steady, "and of the pride you constantly use to push me aside. Did you even notice how I became part of your system?" I stood up and walked over to him, looking him straight in the eyes. "Now you have to take care of yourselves. And what do you want from us?" Michael finally asked, his strength completely gone. "What do I want? I want you to finally take responsibility for your actions, and stop waiting for me to save you. If you want help, earn it." That evening, I sat in my favorite chair, watching my family start to change. I saw how they began to work for real, looking for ways to pay off debts, cutting back on their expenses, and shifting from their luxurious lifestyle to a more grounded reality. For the first time, Michael and Emma started to take a close look at their finances, not waiting for my help anymore. A few days later, they called again. This time, Emma's voice was different. There was no trace of the usual entitled tone. She began telling me how she was working 2 jobs, how she and Michael were planning to give up expensive things to deal with their situation. "Mom, we've started doing everything ourselves. And I want to say that we didn't understand you correctly. We're really grateful for all the support you gave us." I listened to her, and I understood that this moment had changed them. They were starting to feel responsibility for their own lives, and that's exactly what I had been hoping for. This was another step in realizing true strength in a family doesn't come from financial support. It comes from honesty, respect, and the ability to live on your own merits. The next day, I received a call from Michael. He wasn't the confident man I had known a few weeks ago. Now, his voice was full of desperation. He was the same man who had once believed his life couldn't go on without my money, but now he had to face this harsh reality. "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. Emma and I have gone over every possible option. We need to arrange for your help. We have no choice." His voice was filled with despair, and there was no longer that pride he had shown me so many times before. But I didn't feel any sympathy or desire to help. Refusing was difficult, but it was the only right answer. If I didn't teach them now, they would never understand what true responsibility meant. "Michael, do you still want to make me your bank?" I asked with cold certainty. "You're adults now. You need to solve your own problems." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear the weight of his heavy breathing, and that was the response I had been waiting for. An hour later, Michael arrived at my house. He and Emma stood on my doorstep, looking as if they were ready for a fight. Their eyes were full of hopelessness, but I knew this was still another attempt to manipulate me. As they entered, I could feel the atmosphere in the room grow even heavier. "Mom, we're really on our knees," Michael said, trying to look like someone who had no way out. "You have to help, we have no other choice." I dismissed his words. I wasn't their savior. I wasn't their safety net. This wasn't my responsibility, and they needed to understand that. Help? You want me to go back to being your bank? That's over, Michael. All these years you've just used my kindness. Now you have to live on your own money, not mine. Emma lowered her head, her face turning as white as the wall behind her. She felt the full weight of the situation. Michael nervously started tapping his fingers on the table, trying to find words that would somehow convince me. But I was unshakable. You need to start living realistically, I said firmly. I'm not going to pay your debts anymore. Not for the car, not for the school, not for medical expenses. Now it's your turn. The silence that followed was suffocating. They didn't know how to react to such a harsh refusal. When Michael, realizing I wasn't backing down, started to retreat, I knew that this decision was the right one. Over the next week, I watched them try to change their lives. Emma started working at a supermarket, and Michael went in search of a new job. I didn't feel any sympathy. They needed to become stronger, and only then would they survive. A month passed, and their calls became less frequent. But the changes I saw in their lives were impressive. They began counting every penny, stopped wasting money on unnecessary things, and even started thinking about how to properly manage their resources. Michael regained his position at the company, but his attitude toward everything had changed. Emma got promoted at the store. Now, as I watched them working hard and standing on their own 2 feet, I knew I had made the right decision. It had been difficult for my family, but they had started to understand the true meaning of living on your own strength. Now they didn't expect anything from me, and I realized that my revenge wasn't just a refusal to help. It was a lesson they needed to learn. The next time we sat together at the table, the atmosphere was different. They understood that family isn't just about money. It's about support, but that support doesn't always mean constantly rescuing. And that, to me, was their greatest victory. Several months passed, and I could see how hard things were for my children and grandchildren. Yet, they no longer asked me for money. They had started working, saving, and learning to plan their lives. Their eyes no longer reflected resentment or disappointment. They began to understand that hard work was the only way to have something of their own. One evening, as I sat in my favorite chair, I saw Michael and Emma sitting at the table where I had spent so many evenings. Their faces were different now. Instead of looking weary from the struggle, they appeared inspired. "Mom, we want to thank you," Emma said, her voice calm and sincere. "All these years you did everything for us, and we didn't appreciate it. We were foolish, but now we understand." Michael added, "You changed our lives. And though it was hard, now we see how necessary it is to live on our own. We no longer expect someone else to fix our problems. We have to do it ourselves." I looked at them and felt my heart warm. This was what I had been hoping for. They had started to respect me not as someone who handed out money, but as someone who gave them the lesson of real life. "I've always been here to support you," I said. "But I also had to teach you that help isn't always money. True help is teaching you how to stand on your own 2 feet." Michael and Emma nodded quietly. I could see how they were finally starting to realize all the years of endless help I had given them. What I had done wasn't wrong. It was the best thing I could do for them. "You're stronger now," I said. "And I'm proud to see you grow." As they left my house, I knew I hadn't lost them, but I also knew I wasn't their financial support anymore. They had become different, not just because I refused to pay their bills, but because they finally understood the true price of real help. I remained their mother and grandmother, but now it was on equal terms. Now, whenever we meet, there's no longer fear or dissatisfaction at the table. We sit together knowing that family isn't just about material support. It's about support in struggles, in trials, and in understanding that we all respect each other for who we truly are. I no longer hear their pleas. Now they come with genuine gratitude in their eyes. And when we sit together, I feel that my revenge, my battle, has brought a true victory. Not just for me, but for my family.
Thanks for watching. Bye bye.